She thought it would be just another day, fixing engines, covered in grease, working quietly in the shadows where no one cared to notice him. But that day, he walked into a storm he never asked for. Laughter filled the air, sharp and cutting, as someone with power and status reduced him to nothing more than a joke. The challenge thrown his way wasn't about engines, it was about dignity, about worth, about the cruel line drawn between privilege and prejudice. He could have walked away, swallowed the insult like so many before, but this time, the stakes were different. This time, the humiliation would ignite something greater. And what followed? No one in that room could have predicted. For most people, work was just a paycheck. But for Marcus, fixing engines was more than a job. It was pride. His hands carried years of skill, each wrench turned a reminder of what hard work could build when the world tried to take everything else away. Day after day, he showed up at the shop, quiet, steady, determined to prove his worth through action rather than words. Life wasn't easy, but it was his. The smell of oil, the clinking of tools, the steady rhythm of work gave him peace. Customers came and went, some barely looking at him, some pretending not to notice him at all. Still, Marcus kept going, holding, his head high, even when the silence felt heavier than words. What he didn't know was that his routine was about to be shattered. On that afternoon, the kind of day that should have been forgettable, a different kind of customer walked in. Not someone looking for help, but someone looking to humiliate. She carried herself like royalty, dressed in power, her eyes scanning the room not with respect, but with judgment. For Marcus, it began like any other service call, another engine to fix, another chance to prove himself. But what came next wasn't about engines at all. It was about power, pride, and a cruel test that would force him into a spotlight he never asked for. Because sometimes the cruelest moments don't arrive with warning. They disguise themselves as ordinary days until the insult cuts so deep it leaves a scar that can never fade. At first, Marcus thought it was just another customer, the kind who strutted into the shop without a glance at the grease-stained floor, heels clicking like a warning bell. She carried herself with the air of someone who had never been told no in her life, every step dripping with entitlement. Her eyes swept over Marcus like he wasn't even there, pausing only when she realized he was the one who'd be working on her car. A flicker of disdain crossed her face, sharp and quick, but enough to make the room feel colder. Then came the smirk, a twisted curve of her lips that said she didn't see a mechanic standing there. She saw someone beneath her. The request was simple: fix her luxury car's engine. But the way she framed it turned it into something else. Loud enough for others to hear, she leaned on the counter and said, "If you can fix this engine, maybe I'll marry you." The room erupted in laughter. Not the kind of laughter that warms, but the kind that cuts. Mocking, cruel, dehumanizing. Marcus froze. His hands, steady after years of labor, trembled ever so slightly. The words weren't just a joke. They were a challenge meant to remind him of his place. He felt the sting of eyes on him, waiting for a reaction, waiting to see if he would break. Part of him wanted to walk away. He had faced insults before, brushed them off like dust on his coveralls. But this was different. This was public. This was deliberate. The CEO wasn't just mocking him. She was daring him to fail, daring him to confirm the stereotype she already believed. So Marcus swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat and turned toward the car. His silence was not weakness. It was resolve. If they wanted to laugh, let them. He would answer with action. But the task was harder than it appeared. The engine was a mess, complicated, temperamental, the kind of job that tested even the best mechanics. Every bolt he touched seemed ready to snap. Every wire carried the risk of sparking out, and all. The while, he could hear the whispers behind him. He won't get it. He's out of his league. Look at him. He doesn't belong here. The minutes stretched. Sweat dripped down his forehead, mixing with grease. His arms ached, his back burned, but he pressed on. Each movement was precise, careful. Failure wasn't just about a broken engine. It was about proving her right. And that he couldn't allow. Then came the moment. The last bolt tightened, the final connection made. He turned the key. For a second, silence. The kind of silence that suffocates, that makes every breath feel like a lifetime. And then, an engine roar, smooth and powerful, filling the shop with a sound that silenced the laughter. Marcus had done it. Against the mockery, against the odds, he had brought the machine back to life. But instead of admiration, the CEO's face hardened. The smirk vanished, replaced with something colder. Anger. She hadn't expected him to win. She hadn't expected him to expose her cruelty by succeeding. And in that moment, Marcus realized something chilling. This wasn't over. Fixing the engine wasn't the end of the challenge. It was just the beginning of a fight he hadn't chosen. Because when you strip power from those who live on arrogance, they don't surrender quietly. They come back harder, sharper, more dangerous. And Marcus was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. The engine's roar should have been the end of it. Proof enough of his skill, his worth, his dignity. But for the CEO, it wasn't victory. It was humiliation. Her smile twisted, sharp as glass, and the laughter that once filled the room turned into a suffocating silence. Everyone waited to see what she would say, what she would do. And she did not disappoint. With venom in her voice, she leaned in, her words dripping like poison. Anyone can turn a wrench, but a mechanic will never be more than dirt under my shoes. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. No one stopped her. Their silence was its own kind of betrayal, echoing louder than her cruelty. Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. Shame tried to settle on his shoulders, but beneath it burned something fiercer. Anger, steady and unrelenting. He had done everything right. He had proven himself. And still, it wasn't enough. Still, the color of his skin was twisted into a weapon against him. Her next move cut deeper than words. She waved her phone, snapping a picture of him, oily hands and sweat-streaked face, framing it with a mocking caption before anyone could react. Laughter returned, sharper now, amplified by the glow of screens. His humiliation was no longer confined to the shop. It was being broadcast beyond those walls. Marcus stood frozen. He wasn't just fighting her anymore. He was fighting an entire system that allowed this cruelty to thrive. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow as the truth settled over him. This wasn't about fixing an engine. This was about stripping him of dignity in front of the world. And yet, even as the humiliation burned, something stronger rose inside him. He would not be broken. Not here, not like this. The very act meant to silence him had lit a fire that would demand to be heard. Because in that moment, Marcus realized he wasn't just standing for himself. He was standing for everyone who had ever been mocked, dismissed, or reduced to less than human. And what he chose to do next would not just define him, it would define the story they would never forget. The shop fell quiet, but Marcus's silence was not defeat. It was defiance. He placed the keys firmly on the counter, a simple gesture that carried more dignity than any insult could erase. The CEO had her victory in laughter, but Marcus had Adi something she could never touch, the truth of who he was. Skilled, resilient, unbroken. When her photo of him began to spread, she expected more ridicule. But something unexpected happened. Strangers who had never met Marcus saw more than her cruel caption. They saw the strength in his posture, the sweat on his brow, the proof of a man who worked harder in a day than she ever would in a lifetime. Her attempt to shame him became a mirror reflecting her own arrogance. Marcus walked away from that shop, not smaller, but stronger. The humiliation still burned, but it ignited a resolve that no insult could extinguish. He understood now that his struggle wasn't his alone. It was part of a bigger story, one that stretched far beyond a single engine, a single shop, or a single cruel remark. Because racism doesn't always come in the form of violence or headlines. Sometimes it comes wrapped in jokes, in smirks, in the silence of those who stand by and say nothing. And those moments can cut just as deep. Marcus's story is not just about one man. It's about every mechanic, every worker, every person who's ever been told they are less because of the color of their skin. His story is a reminder and a challenge. If dignity can be mocked so easily, then it can also be defended with the same force. If silence can wound, then voices raised together can heal. So the question is, how many more ordinary days must be scarred by cruelty before we finally decide to change?